At the will reading, my father handed my sister $4 million and told me to go earn my own. He thought he was teaching me a lesson in humility. He did not know that the dirty shoebox my grandfather left me contained a secret that would put him in prison and hand me his empire. Before I tell you how I took everything back, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of your family and had to fight for what was yours. My name is Zara, and at 32 years old, I had learned that blood is not thicker than money, especially not in the Brooks family. The conference room at Sterling and Associates smelled of old money lemon polish and my father's expensive cologne. The mahogany table was long enough to land a small plane on, and it served as the battlefield for the final act of my grandfather Earl's life. On one side sat my father Otis. He was adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, looking at his Rolex every 30 seconds as if he had somewhere more important to be. Next to him was my younger sister Bianca. At 26, she was the family's golden child, a social media influencer who had never worked a day in her life. She was busy scrolling through Instagram, her long acrylic nails clicking against the screen like a ticking bomb. And then there was Hunter, her fiancé. He sat with the confident slouch of a white man who had never been told no in his life, his arm draped possessively over Bianca's chair. I sat alone on the opposite side. I had taken an Uber here while they arrived in the family Bentley with the chauffeur. I wore a simple black blazer and trousers, a stark contrast to Bianca's designer dress that cost more than my car. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Mr. Sterling, my grandfather's attorney for 40 years, cleared his throat. He looked tired, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his glasses. He began reading the legalese, his voice a dry drone in the large room. My father sighed loudly, drumming his fingers on the table. "Skip to the assets, Sterling. We all know the old man was losing it at the end. Just tell us what we got." Mr. Sterling paused and looked at my father with a mix of pity and disdain. "Very well, Otis. To my son Otis and my granddaughter Bianca, I bequeath the entirety of my liquid assets. This includes the investment portfolio valued at $4 million, the estate in Martha's Vineyard, and the controlling shares of Brooks Enterprises." Bianca squealed. It was a high-pitched, childish sound that echoed off the wood paneling. She grabbed Hunter's hand and flashed her diamond engagement ring. "Oh my God, Hunter. We can finally buy that penthouse in Tribeca." Hunter grinned, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "You deserve it, babe. It is about time." I sat frozen. I waited for my name. I waited for the acknowledgement that I was also a Brooks. That I was the one who sat by Grandpa's bedside when the cancer took him while Otis was golfing and Bianca was partying in Tulum. But the silence stretched on. My father leaned forward, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He looked me dead in the eyes, savoring the moment. "You are waiting for your handout, aren't you, Zara? Well, keep waiting. You always acted like you were too smart for this family, too independent to listen to me. So go be independent. Go earn your own. You get nothing." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a mix of humiliation and rage, but I refused to blink. I kept my posture straight, my face a mask of indifference. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. That was when Hunter chimed in. He chuckled, a low, condescending sound that made my skin crawl. "Come on, Otis, don't be so harsh. We can still help her out." He looked at me with those icy blue eyes, a fake smile plastered on his face. "Zara, we are going to need a lot of help planning the wedding. If you need cash, we can hire you as a coordinator. I am sure we can scrape together a few grand for a bridesmaid's tip. It is tax deductible for us anyway." Bianca giggled, covering her mouth. "That is a great idea, Hunter. She is so organized. She would make a great assistant." I was about to stand up and walk out. I was about to tell them exactly where they could shove their money and their wedding, but Mr. Sterling raised a hand. "There is one more item," he said, his voice cutting through their laughter like a knife. He reached under the heavy desk and pulled out a cardboard shoebox. It was old, the corners were fraying, and it was held together by a single rubber band. My father laughed a booming sound of disbelief. "What is that?" "Grandpa's old coupon collection. Is that her inheritance?" "A box of trash." Sterling ignored him. He stood up and walked around the table, sliding the box across the polished wood until it stopped directly in front of me. "This is a specific bequest from Earl to Zara. It is separate from the family trust. It requires no trustee oversight. It is yours, Zara, exclusively." I stared at the box. It looked like something you would find in a dumpster. I felt the weight of their eyes on me. Bianca was snickering, whispering something to Hunter. Slowly, I reached out and pulled the rubber band off. It snapped with a sharp sound. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money, no jewelry, no stocks, just a heavy set of rusted iron keys on a plain metal ring and a single index card with an address written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. 402 Industrial Way, South Side. Bianca peered over my shoulder, reading the card. She burst into fresh laughter, louder this time. "Oh my God. Grandpa left you his old warehouse in the hood. That building has been condemned since the 90s. It is literally falling apart. Good luck with the rats, Zara. Maybe you can live there now that you can't afford rent." My father stood up, buttoning his jacket with an air of finality. "Come on, let us go celebrate. The reservation at Le Bernardin is in 20 minutes. Leave her with her garbage. Let her see how far that gets her in the real world." They swept out of the room, a cloud of expensive perfume and arrogance trailing behind them. Hunter didn't even look back. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silence with the old lawyer. I looked down at the rusted keys. I felt a lump in my throat. My grandfather had left me a ruin. He had left me a burden. But as I went to close the box, my finger brushed against the bottom. The cardboard felt thick. Too thick. I lifted the index card and saw the edge of something else tucked underneath the lining of the box. It was a second note folded small on yellow legal paper. I unfolded it, and what I read made my blood run cold and my heart stop. My grandfather didn't just leave me a building, he left me a weapon. And my family had just handed me the ammunition to destroy them. I stood on the sidewalk of 42nd Street and watched the sleek black bumper of my father's Bentley disappear into the chaotic New York traffic. I was holding a box of trash in one hand and my dignity in the other. I ordered an Uber, but not to my apartment. I typed in the address my grandfather had left me, 402 Industrial Way. The driver, a heavy-set man with kind eyes named Marcus, looked at me in the rear-view mirror as we crossed the bridge. He looked at my blazer, my heels, and then at the destination on his GPS. "Miss, are you sure about this location? That is deep in the south side. It is not exactly an area for sightseeing, especially not dressed like that." "I am sure, Marcus," I said, staring out the window. "It is apparently my inheritance." He didn't ask any more questions. As we drove further away from the glass skyscrapers and manicured parks, the city began to change. The buildings became shorter, squatter. The vibrant billboards for Broadway shows were replaced by faded advertisements for bail bonds and payday loans. We passed rows of boarded-up houses and empty lots choked with weeds. This was the part of the city my father pretended did not exist. This was where the Brooks family fortune started, and where he was determined to leave it behind. When the car finally slowed to a stop, my heart sank into my stomach. The building was a monstrosity. It was a 2-story brick warehouse that looked like it had survived a war and lost. The windows were shattered, jagged teeth of glass hanging from rusted frames. Graffiti covered every inch of the lower walls, a chaotic mural of gang tags and spray-painted curses. A chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, but it had been cut open in multiple places. It wasn't just old. It was a corpse of a building. "You want me to wait?" Marcus asked, his voice laced with concern. "No, thank you. I will be fine." I forced a smile I did not feel and stepped out onto the cracked pavement. The air smelled of gasoline and wet cardboard. Before I could even reach the gate, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen flashed Mom. For a split second, a foolish part of me hoped she was calling to check on me, to tell me she was sorry for how Dad treated me, that she had left the restaurant and was coming to get me. I slid the answer button. "Hello, Mom. Zara, where are you?" Her voice wasn't worried. It was frantic, but for all the wrong reasons. "We are at the restaurant and people are asking where you are. The Jenkins family is here, and they asked why the eldest Brooks daughter isn't celebrating. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for your father?" I stopped walking. My hand gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Embarrassing for him. "Mom, he just disowned me in front of a lawyer. He gave Bianca $4 million and gave me a condemned building. Oh, stop being dramatic," she snapped. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "He is just teaching you a lesson, Zara. You know how he is. He hates it when you act so superior. If you just came here, cried a little and apologized, he would probably give you a position at the foundation. Why do you always have to be so difficult? Why can you not just be a good daughter for once?" A lump formed in my throat, hot and painful. I realized then that I didn't lose my family today. I never had one. My mother didn't want a daughter. She wanted a prop. She wanted peace, even if the cost of that peace was my self-respect. I am done apologizing for existing, Mom. Enjoy the lobster. I hung up before she could say another word and blocked the number. The silence that followed was deafening. I was truly alone. I turned back to the building. This pile of bricks was all I had. I navigated through the weeds, careful not to twist my ankle on the uneven ground. The main entrance was a heavy steel door rusted shut. I pulled out the iron keyring from the shoebox. My hands were shaking. It took me 3 tries to find the right key. When I finally turned it, the lock groaned, a screeching sound of metal against metal that echoed down the empty street. I put my shoulder against the door and shoved. It gave way with a heavy thud. I stumbled inside, coughing as a cloud of dust assaulted my lungs. The smell hit me instantly: mold, damp wood, and something else. Something metallic. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a cavernous, empty space. The floor was concrete stained with oil and water. Pigeons fluttered in the rafters high above, disturbed by the intrusion. It was empty. Completely empty. Just a hollow shell. "Is this it, Grandpa?" I whispered to the darkness. "Is this the lesson? That everything rots?" I walked deeper into the gloom, following the instructions on the second note. It said the office was in the back, behind the old loading dock. I found a wooden door that looked surprisingly intact compared to the rest of the place. I tried another key. It clicked smoothly. I pushed the door open and gasped. It was like stepping into a time capsule. The room was small, windowless, and perfectly preserved. There was no dust here. A heavy oak desk sat in the center, a leather chair behind it. The walls were lined with filing cabinets. The air here didn't smell like rot. It smelled like tobacco and old paper. It smelled like him. I walked around the desk and sat in his chair. It creaked, a familiar sound that brought tears to my eyes. On the desk, sitting alone on the blotter, was a book. It was a thick black ledger bound in leather that was worn soft at the edges. I ran my hand over the cover. This was it. The start of everything. I opened the first page. It wasn't just numbers. It was a diary of transactions, dates, names, amounts. But as I flipped through the pages, I saw red ink. Lots of it. And notes in the margins written in a code I recognized from my childhood games with him. But my moment of discovery was cut short. Something white on the floor near the door caught my eye. It had fallen from the mail slot. I walked over and picked it up. It was an envelope with the official seal of the City Department of Finance. It was already opened. I pulled out the letter and my knees nearly gave out. It was a notice of seizure. "Dear property owner, this is a final notification regarding the outstanding property taxes and environmental cleanup fees associated with 402 Industrial Way. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in immediate foreclosure and auction. I looked at the bottom of the page. The total amount due was $512,000. The paper shook in my hands. A cold realization washed over me, colder than the drafty warehouse. My father knew. He knew about the debt. He knew about the taxes. He didn't just cut me out of the will. He didn't just give me nothing. He gave me an anchor meant to drown me. He waited until the last possible moment to transfer the title to me so the debt would become my legal responsibility. I sank to the floor, the ledger in one hand and the lawsuit in the other. I had no job, no money. And now I was $500,000 in debt. I let out a scream of frustration that echoed through the empty warehouse. But as the echo faded, I looked down at the ledger again. I looked at the specific dates my grandfather had circled in red. They weren't from 40 years ago. The last entry was from 3 weeks before he died. And the name next to the withdrawal was not his. It was Otis. My tears dried up instantly. I wasn't just going to pay this debt, I was going to make them pay. Every single cent. 3 days later, I walked into the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel wearing the only evening gown I hadn't sold yet. It was a vintage red silk dress that my grandfather had bought for my mother years ago. A dress she had thrown away because she said the color was too aggressive. Tonight, aggression was exactly what I needed. The room was suffocating with the scent of white lilies and expensive champagne. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over New York's elite. This was Bianca and Hunter's engagement party, a celebration that likely cost more than the $500,000 debt currently hanging over my head. I wasn't here for the cake. I was here for answers. I needed to find Mr. Sterling. I had called his office a dozen times, but his secretary kept saying he was unavailable. I knew he would be here. He never missed a Brooks family event, mostly out of obligation to my grandfather. As I navigated through the crowd, I felt the eyes of my relatives burning into my back. They whispered behind their champagne flutes, probably placing bets on how long it would take for me to beg my father for forgiveness. I kept my head high, grabbing a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter just to have something to do with my hands. I scanned the room looking for the silver hair of the old attorney, but instead, I found a wall of broad shoulders blocking my path. It was Hunter. He looked every bit the perfect fiancé in his tuxedo, his teeth blindingly white, his hair perfectly coiffed. But up close, I could smell the bourbon on his breath and see the predatory glint in his icy blue eyes. "Zara," he said, his voice smooth like oil. "I didn't think you would show up." Bold move considering what Hunter I asked, stepping to the side to bypass him. But he stepped with me, cornering me against the long marble bar. "Considering you are broke," he whispered, leaning in close so no one else could hear. "I heard about the tax lien on the warehouse. 500 grand. That is a heavy load for a girl who just lost her job. Word gets around fast in this family, Zara. Otis is laughing about it. He says you will be in bankruptcy court by Christmas." I gripped my glass tighter. Of course they knew. It was part of the plan. "Excuse me?" I said coldly. "I have somewhere to be." "Wait," Hunter said, placing a hand on my arm. His grip was firm, too firm. "Listen, I am not like them. I actually like you, Zara. You have grit. I hate to see you drown. So I have a proposition." I looked at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. "What kind of proposition?" "I have a real estate holding company, a small side project separate from your father's business. I can take that building off your hands. I will absorb the debt deal with the city, handle the cleanup. It is a headache, sure, but I can write it off as a loss for tax purposes. In exchange, I will give you $10,000 cash, tonight." I stared at him. $10,000. It was an insult. It wouldn't even cover my rent for 3 months in this city. But more than that, it didn't make sense. Hunter was a shark. He didn't do charity. He didn't take on $500,000 in debt just to give me pocket money. "Why?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Why would you want a condemned building in the South Side? It is worthless trash, remember. That is what you called it at the will reading." He shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. I am a sentimental guy. Plus, maybe I want to turn it into a parking lot. Who knows? Look, it is 10 grand or bankruptcy, Zara. Take the lifeline. Do it for Bianca. She doesn't want to see her big sister living on the street. My gut screamed that he was lying. Every instinct I had honed as a crisis manager flared up. Hunter was greedy. If he wanted that building, it wasn't because he wanted to help me. It was because he saw something my father didn't. Or maybe something they both saw. I will think about it, I lied, pulling my arm free from his grasp. Don't think too long, he called after me, his voice losing its fake warmth. The offer expires when the dessert is served. I walked away as fast as I could without running. My heart was pounding. I needed fresh air. I needed to think. I slipped through a side door that led to the terrace balcony. It was empty save for a group of men smoking cigars in the corner, hidden by a large potted palm. I leaned against the stone railing, looking out at the city lights, trying to calm my breathing. That was when I heard a familiar, booming laugh. It was my father. I froze. I shouldn't be eavesdropping. I should leave. But then I heard him say the word, warehouse. I pressed myself into the shadows of the alcove, holding my breath. Otis, you are a genius, a rough voice said. I recognized it as one of his golf buddies, a city councilman. But are you sure she will sell? My father took a long drag of his cigar, the smoke drifting into the night air. Oh, she will sell. She has no choice. I slapped her with the environmental cleanup fees yesterday. She is drowning. She will beg Hunter to take it off her hands for pennies. And once we have the title back, the councilman asked. My father chuckled, a sound that made my blood boil. Once we have the title, you push through the Southside Connector project next week. The city needs that land for the new subway terminal. The eminent domain payout alone is projected at $50 million. $50 million. The number echoed in my head like a gunshot. I had to cover my mouth to stop myself from gasping. It is beautiful, isn't it? My father continued. My father, the old fool, sat on that gold mine for decades because he promised the community he would build a youth center. He died protecting a neighborhood that does not matter. I am just correcting his mistake. Zara gets the debt, Hunter buys the deed under his shell company, and we split the city payout. It is the perfect crime, gentlemen. And the best part is, she thinks she is losing a burden, but she is actually handing us the crown jewels. The men laughed, clinking their glasses. I stood there in the dark, my entire body shaking. Not from fear, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated rage. They weren't just stealing my inheritance. They were stealing my grandfather's legacy. They were mocking his memory while plotting to bulldoze the community he loved. I looked down at the street below. The cars looked like little toys. Hunter wanted to buy me out for $10,000. My father wanted to erase me. I turned around and walked back into the party. I didn't look for Mr. Sterling anymore. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what to do. I needed a war room. I walked past the bar, past Hunter, who winked at me, past my sister, who was showing off her ring. I walked straight out the front door and into the night. They wanted a fight. They wanted to play dirty. Well, they forgot one thing. I was the one holding the ledger, and I was about to rewrite the ending of their little story. I did not go back to my apartment that night. I went straight back to the warehouse. I did not care about the rats or the cold or the smell of mold dampening my vintage silk dress. I dragged the heavy oak desk to the center of the room, directly under a single flickering bulb, and set up my command center. I had my laptop, a mobile hotspot, and a thermos of black coffee I had picked up from a 24-hour diner on the way. My father and Hunter thought they had won because they had the money and the connections, but they forgot what I did for a living. I was a crisis manager. My entire career was built on digging through digital trash to find the one piece of information that could save or destroy a reputation. And tonight, I wasn't saving anyone. For the next 6 hours, the only sound in the cavernous warehouse was the furious clicking of my keyboard. I didn't just look at the public listings. I dove into the deep web of municipal bureaucracy. I pulled up the urban development meeting minutes from the last 18 months. I cross-referenced zoning permits with environmental impact studies. It was tedious work, the kind of boring data analysis that my sister Bianca would have fallen asleep doing in 5 minutes. But to me, it was a treasure map. And then at 4 in the morning, I found it. It was buried in a subcommittee report on transportation infrastructure, the South Side Connector project. My father hadn't lied about the subway terminal, but he had underestimated the scale. The city wasn't just building a station. They were planning a multimodal transit hub that would connect the airport to the financial district. And looking at the blueprints, my heart began to race. The proposed entrance to the main terminal was literally the front door of my warehouse. I pulled up the valuation reports. The city had set aside a budget for eminent domain acquisitions. For critical properties that blocked the main access points, they were authorized to offer up to 3 times the market value to avoid litigation delays. I did the math on a napkin. Based on the square footage and the strategic necessity of the location, the payout wasn't $50 million. It was closer to 75. I leaned back in the creaking leather chair and laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. My father was willing to let me drown in a $500,000 debt while he plotted to steal $75 million. He was going to buy it from me through Hunter for pennies, pay off the tax lien, and then flip it to the city before the ink was even dry. It was evil, but it was also sloppy. Because now I knew. But knowledge of the real estate deal wasn't enough. That was just business. To truly beat them, I needed something personal. I needed leverage that no amount of money could fix. I closed my laptop and pushed it aside. I reached for the black ledger. In the harsh light of the overhead bulb, the book looked even more ominous. I opened it to the first page again. The numbers stared back at me. Columns of dates and figures, but the descriptions were just strings of random digits. 88, 24, 11. 1905, 99. It looked like gibberish. But my grandfather was not a complicated man. He valued loyalty, and he valued memory. He used to tell me that people forget the things that matter, so you have to lock them away where only family can find them. Only family. I closed my eyes thinking back to the summers I spent in his office while my parents were vacationing in Europe. He used to teach me math using the dates of historical events. He loved history. But he loved his wife, my grandmother, even more. I looked at the code again. 88. That wasn't a year. But if I subtracted the year he started the company, 1960, it didn't make sense. I tried his birthday. I tried my birthday. Nothing worked. Then I remembered something he said to me when I was 12. Zara, a man's life is defined by the day he meets his match. I typed the date he met my grandmother into my phone. June 12, 1955. 06/12/55. I looked at the first string of code in the ledger. I applied a simple shift cipher using those numbers as the key. I shifted the first digit back by 0, the second by 6, the third by 1, and so on. The first number 8 became 2, the second became 0. Slowly, painfully, letter by letter, number by number, the gibberish began to transform into readable text. It worked. The code was the day he fell in love. My hands trembled as I began to decode the entries from the last 5 years. I wasn't looking at a list of business expenses anymore. I was looking at a crime scene. The first thing that jumped out at me was a recurring monthly withdrawal of $25,000, labeled simply Project Canary. I traced the routing number my grandfather had meticulously recorded next to it. It didn't go to a vendor. It went to a private account at a bank in the Cayman Islands. But the beneficiary address was local. It was an apartment in Midtown Manhattan. A very expensive apartment. I did a quick search on the address. It was leased to a woman named Elena Rostova, a former model 24 years old, 2 years younger than my sister. My stomach turned. My father, the pillar of the community, the man who preached family values at every charity gala, had been siphoning company funds to keep a mistress who was young enough to be his daughter. That was why the company was cash poor. That was why he was so desperate for the warehouse deal. He wasn't just greedy, he was bleeding the company dry. But I kept reading. The next entry was even more shocking. Dated 6 months ago. A lump sum transfer of $200,000. The code name next to it was The Hunter. I felt a chill run down my spine. I decoded the notes in the margin. Payment to covered gambling losses. Bellagio Casino. Las Vegas. To prevent kneecapping. I stared at the page, blinking rapidly. Hunter. My sister's perfect fiancé. The man who looked down on me for being poor. He was a degenerate gambler. My father had paid off a loan shark to save Hunter's legs. And then the final piece of the puzzle. A note written in my grandfather's handwriting, not in code, but in plain English at the bottom of the page. It was dated 2 days before he died. Otis came to me today. He asked for more money. He said Hunter is in deep again. 1 million this time. I told him no. I told him I'm cutting them off. I am changing the will. Zara gets the ledger. She is the only one with the hands clean enough to hold it. I slammed the book shut. The dust flew up into the light. Everything made sense now. The rush to get the will read, the hostility, the desperation to get the building back. Otis wasn't just trying to get rich. He was trying to cover up a 20-year history of embezzlement and save his future son-in-law from the mob. They were all drowning in their own lies. The sun was starting to rise outside, casting long beams of dusty light through the broken windows. I stood up and walked to the center of the room. My fatigue was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. They thought they sent me here to die, to fade away in the ruin of the South Side. Instead, they had sent me to the armory. I had the map to the treasure, and I had the weapon to kill the dragon. I picked up my phone. It was time to make a call. Not to my father, not to Bianca, but to the one person in this city who hated Otis Brooks as much as I did right now. I dialed the number for the Internal Revenue Service's whistleblower hotline. But then I stopped. No. That was too easy. Prison was too good for them. I wanted them to suffer first. I wanted them to feel the hope of winning and then watch it turn to ash in their mouths. I put the phone down and picked up the ledger. I would play their game. I would let them think they had won. I would let Hunter think he had scammed me. I would let Otis think he was safe. And then when they were standing at the altar popping champagne and counting their millions, I would burn their entire world to the ground. 2 days after I decoded the ledger, I received a text message from my mother. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation with me in 3 years without asking for a favor. The message was short and deceptively sweet. Come for dinner tonight. Dad wants to bury the hatchet. We miss you. I stared at the screen and almost laughed. They did not miss me. They missed the deed to the warehouse. But I replied with a simple okay because I wanted to look them in the eye. I wanted to see if they could maintain their lies while I sat there knowing exactly how much their souls were worth. I arrived at the family estate in Scarsdale at 7 sharp. The house was a sprawling colonial mansion painted a pristine white sitting on 3 acres of manicured lawn. Growing up, this place had always felt more like a museum than a home. We were not allowed to sit on certain sofas. We were not allowed to wear shoes on the carpet. Everything had to be perfect to hide the rot underneath. The maid let me in. She was new, a young girl who looked terrified. She took my coat and avoided eye contact. I walked into the dining room where the table was already set with the good china, the set my mother usually reserved for the mayor or the bishop. Otis sat at the head of the table naturally. Bianca and Hunter were on one side, and my mother Elaine sat opposite them. The seat to my father's left remained empty. It was the seat of dishonor, the spot where he could scrutinize your every bite. Zara, so glad you could make it, Otis said, not bothering to stand up. He gestured to the empty chair with a forkful of steak. Sit down. You look thin. Isn't she looking thin, Elaine? My mother offered a tight, nervous smile. She looks tired, Otis. Probably all that stress with the job situation. But you are home now, Zara. That is what matters. I sat down and unfolded the linen napkin. The air in the room was so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. For the first 20 minutes, we played a grotesque game of happy family. Otis talked about his golf game. Hunter bragged about a new car he was eyeing, a Porsche, funded no doubt by the money my father was stealing from the company. Bianca complained about the wedding planner not understanding her vision for a dove release ceremony. I ate quietly watching them. I watched how Hunter's hand shook slightly when he reached for his wine glass, a sign of the stress from his gambling debts. I watched how my father checked his phone under the table every 2 minutes, likely waiting for a message from his mistress Elena. They were all drowning, and they thought I was the life raft. Finally, as the main course was cleared, my mother signaled the start of the ambush. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her skin was cold. "Zara, honey, we have been so worried about you," she began, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "We know about the debt on that horrible building Grandpa left you. $500,000. It is just cruel. We cannot stand by and watch you ruin your credit score over a mistake." Otis cleared his throat and wiped his mouth. "Your mother is right. I was harsh at the will reading. I admit that. I was grieving. But I am a businessman, Zara, and more importantly, I am a father. I want to help you fix this mess." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check. He slid it across the mahogany table until it rested next to my wine glass. I picked it up. $50,000. "I am willing to buy that property from you through the family company," Otis said, leaning back in his chair with a benevolent smile. "I will take on the debt. I will deal with the city. You walk away clean with 50 grand in your pocket. You can get a new apartment. Start fresh. It is more than fair. It is charity, really." I looked at the check. Then I looked at my mother. Her eyes were wide, pleading. "Please, Zara," she whispered. "Just take it. Don't let pride destroy you. I don't want to see this family torn apart over money. Do it for me. Do it for the peace of this house. Do it for the family." That was always her weapon. She used guilt like a surgeon uses a scalpel. But this time the guilt didn't cut. It just annoyed me. Bianca chimed in, unable to help herself. She tossed her hair back and gave me a pitying look. "Honestly, Zara, you should be thanking Daddy. 50,000 is a lot for you right now. And if you are worried about clothes for job interviews, I went through my closet this morning. I have some old Gucci bags and dresses from last season that I don't wear anymore. They might be a little tight on you since you have gained weight in your hips, but beggars can't be choosers, right?" Hunter chuckled into his drink. "That is generous of you, babe. See, Zara, everyone wants to help. Just sign the papers Otis has in his study, and we can all have dessert." The room went silent. They all stared at me, 4 pairs of eyes, expecting gratitude. They expected the old Zara, the Zara who begged for approval, the Zara who would take crumbs and call it a feast. I looked down at the check again. $50,000, the price of my dignity, the price they put on a $75 million asset. Slowly I stood up. The chair legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I picked up my glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. It was a deep blood-red vintage that my father prized above all others. "You know, Dad?" I said, my voice steady and calm. "I have been thinking a lot about value lately. About what things are really worth." Otis narrowed his eyes. "What are you rambling about? Just say thank you and sit down." I smiled. It was a cold smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. I walked over to where he sat. I looked at the pristine white Persian rug beneath his feet. It was his pride and joy, imported from Iran, completely impractical for a dining room, but he loved it because it showed he was untouchable. $50,000, I repeated. I tilted my glass. For a second, time seemed to slow down. I watched the red liquid cascade over the rim of the crystal glass. It splashed onto the table, running over the check, soaking into the paper, turning his signature into a blurry mess. Then it dripped off the edge and splattered onto the white rug. The stain bloomed instantly dark and violent, like a gunshot wound on snow. Otis jumped up, his face turning purple. "What the hell are you doing? Have you lost your mind? That rug cost $20,000. My mother screamed. Bianca gasped, covering her mouth. Hunter looked at me with his mouth open. I dropped the empty glass onto the soggy check. It didn't break. It just rolled to a stop against the wine bottle. "I haven't lost my mind, Father," I said, staring him down. "I have found my calculator. You want that building. You want to save your precious company from the hole you dug. You want to keep your secrets buried." I leaned in close, whispering so only he could hear the menace in my voice. $50,000 is an insult. If you want me to even consider saving you from the train wreck that is coming, you better add 3 zeros to that number. And even then I might just decide to let it burn. I turned around and walked toward the door. Behind me, the chaos erupted. My mother was crying about the carpet. Otis was shouting threats. Bianca was calling me a psychopath. I stopped at the archway and looked back one last time. "The war has started, Otis," I said. "And you just lost the first battle. Don't bother sending the bill for the rug. Take it out of my inheritance." "Oh, wait, you already did." I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the front door wide open. I could hear them screaming behind me, but for the first time in my life, their voices didn't hurt. They sounded like music, the music of an empire crumbling. And I was the one conducting the orchestra. The morning after I poured a vintage Cabernet onto my father's Persian rug, I woke up feeling invincible. I put on my sharpest blazer, drank my coffee black, and walked into the glass tower of Miller and Associates, ready to handle a crisis for a client. I did not know that the crisis was going to be me. When I swiped my badge at the turnstile, the light flashed red. I tried again. Red. A security guard named Paul, who I had exchanged pleasantries with for 3 years, walked over. He did not smile. He looked at the floor and mumbled that I needed to go to the lobby waiting area. 10 minutes later, David Miller, the CEO and my direct mentor, came down holding a cardboard box. David looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. He handed me the box. Inside was a picture frame of my grandfather, my stapler, and a potted succulent. "I am sorry, Zara," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Otis called the board this morning. He threatened to pull the entire Brooks account and 3 other subsidiary contracts if you remained on the payroll. We are talking about 40% of our annual revenue. My hands are tied." I looked at David. This was a man who had praised my ethics last week. Now he was firing me on the sidewalk like a thief. "He bought you too," I said simply. David winced. "He gave you a severance package, 3 months' pay, but you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement clause regarding the Brooks family." I laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound. "Keep the money, David. You are going to need it to buy a conscience." I took the box and walked out onto the busy Manhattan street. I was unemployed. But Otis was not done. He was conducting a scorched earth campaign. When I got to my apartment building, a man in a cheap suit was waiting for me. He asked if I was Zara Brooks. When I nodded, he shoved a thick envelope into my hands and walked away without a word. I opened it in the elevator. It was a lawsuit filed in the state Supreme Court. Otis Brooks versus the estate of Earl Brooks. I read the summary and felt bile rise in my throat. My father wasn't just suing to get the building back. He was suing to invalidate the entire codicil of the will. The legal filing claimed that my grandfather was suffering from advanced dementia and lack of testamentary capacity when he left me the warehouse. It claimed that I, Zara Brooks, had used undue influence to manipulate a senile old man into giving me family assets. They were dragging my grandfather's name through the mud. They were calling the sharpest man I ever knew crazy just to steal what he gave me. I stormed into my apartment and threw the box on the sofa. I needed to call a lawyer. Not Sterling, he was too close to them. I needed a shark. I reached for my laptop to transfer some funds from my savings account to pay a retainer. Access denied. I tried my checking account. Access denied. I called the bank, my hands shaking with rage. The customer service representative told me that all my accounts had been frozen due to a pending litigation regarding the source of my funds. Otis had claimed that the money in my accounts might be proceeds from the assets I allegedly stole from the estate. He had cut off my income. He had frozen my savings. He had slandered my name. In less than 24 hours, my father had stripped me of everything except the clothes on my back and a crumbling warehouse in the South Side. I sat on the floor of my living room as the sun went down. I didn't turn on the lights. I couldn't afford the electricity bill. I was hungry, but my credit cards were useless. This was how he broke people. This was how he maintained control. He didn't just defeat you, he starved you until you crawled back to him. At 9 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. I assumed it was the landlord coming to tell me my rent check had bounced, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw Hunter. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans, trying to look casual, trying to look like he wasn't the enemy. I opened the door but left the safety chain on. "What do you want, Hunter?" I asked. He looked around the hallway nervously. "Can I come in, Zara?" "I brought food. I know they froze your accounts." "That is messed up. I want to help." My stomach growled at the smell of Thai food in the bag he was holding. I undid the chain and let him in. If he was here, it was because Otis sent him, or because he wanted something. Hunter set the food on the table. He looked around my apartment, his eyes lingering on the packed boxes from my office. "Otis is out for blood," he said, opening a container of pad thai. "He is not going to stop Zara. He has lawyers who cost more per hour than you make in a month. He will drag this lawsuit out for years. You will be homeless before you even get a court date." I know I said, taking a bite of the food. I hated that I was eating his charity, but I needed the energy. "So what is the message? Does he want me to surrender?" Hunter shook his head. He pulled a chair close to mine, too close. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the smell of old sweat. "Otis doesn't know I am here. This is just me and you. Look, I know you have the ledger. Otis thinks you just have the building, but I saw the look on your face at the party. You found the book, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I just chewed slowly, watching him. Hunter leaned in, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know what is in there. I know about the gambling debts. If that gets out, Bianca leaves me. The prenup says if I embarrass the family, I get nothing. So we are in the same boat, Zara. We both need money, and we both need Otis to calm down. So here is my offer," he continued, and his hand slid across the table to cover mine. His palm was clammy. "Give me the ledger and sign the deed over to my shell company. I will destroy the book so Otis never sees it. In exchange, I won't just give you 10 grand. I will take care of you, Zara." I pulled my hand back. "What do you mean, take care of me?" Hunter smiled, and it was the most repulsive thing I had ever seen. He looked me up and down, his eyes undressing me. "Bianca is boring. She is a trophy, but she is cold. You have fire. I have always liked that about you. I can set you up in an apartment in the city. I will pay the rent. I will give you a monthly allowance. You won't have to work. You can be comfortable. And all you have to do is be nice to me. Keep my secrets. Let me visit you a few times a week." I felt the vomit rising in my throat. He wasn't just asking for the building. He was asking me to be his mistress. He wanted to own the sisters, one for the public image and one for his dark desires. He wanted to turn me into the very thing my father was using to drain the company. My first instinct was to slap him, to scream, to throw the hot noodles in his face. But then I remembered the ledger. I remembered what being a crisis manager meant. It meant using your enemy's arrogance against them. I forced my facial muscles to relax. I forced a look of hesitation, of vulnerability. I reached into my pocket and silently tapped the screen of my phone 3 times. The voice memo app started recording. I looked up at him, making my eyes wide. "So let me get this straight, Hunter," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You want me to give you the evidence of your gambling addiction, and in return you will pay for my apartment and give me an allowance as long as I sleep with you behind my sister's back. Is that the deal?" Hunter grinned, thinking he had won. Thinking I was broken enough to say yes. "Exactly," he said. "It is a win-win, Zara. You get financial security, I get a little excitement, and Otis never knows. Nobody gets hurt." I picked up the container of food and stood up. "I need to think about it," I said. "It is a big decision." "Take your time," he said, standing up and moving toward me. He tried to kiss my cheek, but I turned away just in time. "Don't take too long, though. Rent is due on the 1st." He winked and walked out the door, whistling a tune. I locked the door and bolted it. Then I took the phone out of my pocket. I stopped the recording and pressed play. Hunter's voice filled the room, clear as a bell, proposing to make me his paid mistress. I looked at the lawsuit on the table. Otis accused me of being a manipulator. He had no idea. I didn't have a job. I didn't have money. But I had a voice recording that could end Hunter's marriage and humiliate the Brooks family in a way a lawsuit never could. I wasn't going to use it yet. Not while I was weak. I was going to wait until I had the strength to twist the knife. I finished the pad thai. It tasted like victory. The recording of Hunter's voice was a shield, but I needed a sword. I needed something that would cut the head off the snake, not just wound its tail. The next morning, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses to avoid being recognized by any press my father might have alerted, I took the subway to the Upper East Side. I wasn't going to the law offices of Sterling and Associates. Otis would have spies there. I was going to Arthur Sterling's private brownstone. Mr. Sterling had been my grandfather's best friend since college. He was the only man Earl Brooks trusted completely. When he opened the door, he didn't look like the titan of law who had read the will just days ago. He looked old. He was wearing a bathrobe at 10 in the morning, and his hand shook as he held the doorframe. "Zara," he whispered, looking past me into the street. "You shouldn't be here. Otis has threatened to revoke my pension. He is forcing me into early retirement. If he sees us together, he will ruin me." I pushed past him gently into the hallway. "I am not here to ask you to fight him, Arthur. I know he has you cornered. I just need to know one thing. Why did grandfather leave me the ledger? What did he want me to find?" Sterling slumped onto a bench in the hallway. He looked small, defeated by a man half his caliber. "Earl wanted you to know the truth, Zara. But he was too ashamed to say it while he was alive. He loved Otis despite everything. He kept hoping Otis would change. But he knew he wouldn't." He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. "I cannot give you the legal files, Zara. Otis has them under lock and key. But if you want to understand why your father is so terrified of that ledger, go see Martha." Martha. I asked the name, sparking a vague memory from my childhood. "You mean our old housekeeper? The one who retired 10 years ago?" Sterling nodded. "Otis stopped paying her pension 6 months ago. He put her in a state facility. He thought she was too senile to remember. But Martha knows where all the bodies are buried. Go find her. And ask her about the summer of 1959. I took the paper. The address was for a nursing home in Queens called Shady Pines. The name was deceptive. It was a brick block of a building next to a highway overpass, smelling of exhaust fumes and neglect. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of bleach and boiled vegetables. It was a place where people were sent to be forgotten. I found Martha in room 3B. She was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, staring at a brick wall. She looked frail, her skin like parchment paper. But when I walked in, her eyes snapped to mine. They were sharp, clear, and filled with recognition. "Miss Zara." She rasped, her voice sounding like dry leaves. "You look just like your grandmother, same stubborn chin." I pulled up a metal folding chair and sat next to her. "Hello, Martha. I am sorry it has been so long. I didn't know you were here." She scoffed. "Of course you didn't. Your father told everyone I went back to Georgia to live with my sister. He dumped me here the month your grandfather got sick. Stopped the checks. Said the company was cutting costs. I took her hand. It was cold and bony. He cut me off too, Martha. He took everything. I need to stop him. Mr. Sterling told me to ask you about 1959. Martha's face changed. The bitterness softened into something resembling pity. She looked at the door to make sure we were alone, then leaned in close. 1959, she whispered. That was the year the devil came into this house. She squeezed my hand. Your grandfather Earl was a good man, a great man, but he was a proud man. He wanted a legacy more than anything. He wanted a son, but he couldn't have one. The doctors told him he was sterile. It broke his heart. I frowned, but he had Otis. Martha shook her head slowly. No child. He didn't. Your grandmother. God rest her soul. She was beautiful, but she was weak. She couldn't stand seeing Earl so depressed. So that summer, while Earl was away on business in London, she made a mistake. A mistake with a man from the country club. A handsome man, but a bad seed. When she found out she was pregnant, she wanted to die. She confessed everything to Earl when he came home. I sat frozen, the noise of the nursing home fading away. Earl forgave her. Martha continued. He loved her too much to leave her. And he was too proud to let the world know he couldn't father a child. So they made a pact. They would raise the boy as his own. They would never speak of it. That boy was Otis. So Otis is not a Brooks, I whispered, the realization crashing over me like a tidal wave. Biologically, no, Martha said. And he knows it. He found out when he was 18, found a letter your grandmother wrote. That is why he is so cruel, Zara. That is why he hates you. Because you are the real thing. You have Earl's spirit. Otis has always felt like an imposter in his own skin. He spent his whole life trying to prove he owns that name, while knowing deep down he is just a fraud. She leaned back, exhausted by the confession. Your grandfather wrote it down, you know. Not in the will, in the original trust charter from 1970, the one that governs the entire company. I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my ears. What does the charter say? It says that the chairmanship and the controlling voting rights can only pass to a direct biological descendant of Earl Brooks. If there are none, the assets are to be liquidated and donated to charity. Earl put that in there before you were born, just in case Otis turned out bad. He wanted an escape hatch. I stood up, my mind racing. This was it. This was the missing piece. Otis wasn't suing me just to get the building back because of the subway deal. He was suing me because if I dug deep enough, if I contested the will and forced a paternity test or unsealed the original trust charter, he would lose everything. Not just the money. He would lose his identity. He would lose the company. He would be exposed as a fraud to the entire world. He was terrified. The man who sat at the head of the table, who lectured me on family values, who cast me out for being different, was the one who didn't belong. I looked at Martha. You have given me the key, Martha. I am going to get you out of here, I promise. She smiled, closing her eyes. Go get him, Zara. Make him pay for what he did to this family. I walked out of the nursing home and into the bright sunlight. The noise of the highway didn't bother me anymore. I didn't feel poor. I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous. I pulled out my phone and looked at the picture of my father from the engagement party, looking so smug, so secure in his power. He thought he was a king sitting on a throne. He didn't know he was sitting on a landmine. And I had just found the detonator. I wasn't just going to win a lawsuit. I was going to dismantle his entire existence. But I had to be smart. If I revealed this now, he would destroy the evidence. I needed to trap him. I needed him to say it or sign something that proved he knew. I hailed a taxi. My destination wasn't my apartment, it was the public library. I needed to look up the laws on corporate charters and biological clauses. I had a lot of reading to do. The war had just changed from a battle for money to a battle for blood. And my blood was the only thing that was real. I made a tactical error. I assumed that beneath the layers of designer clothing and social media filters, my sister Bianca was still the little girl I used to protect from thunderstorms. I thought that if I showed her the truth, if I proved to her that the man she was about to marry was a predator who viewed her as a walking ATM, she would wake up. I thought I could save her. I did not realize that some people love their chains as long as they are made of gold. I arranged to meet Bianca at the bridal salon in Soho. She was doing her final fitting for the wedding dress, a $50,000 custom Vera Wang gown that my father had paid for with money embezzled from the company. When I walked in, she was standing on a pedestal surrounded by mirrors looking like a princess. She saw me in the reflection and rolled her eyes, but she waved the seamstresses away. "Make it quick, Zara," she said, admiring her silhouette. "I have a tasting menu in 20 minutes. If you are here to ask for money again, the answer is no. Hunter told me you tried to shake him down at your apartment." I stopped cold. Hunter had gotten ahead of the story. He had planted the seed, but I had the water to make the truth grow. "I am not here for money, Bianca," I said, pulling out my phone. "I am here because I love you, and because you need to hear who you are actually marrying." I pressed play. The recording was loud and clear in the quiet salon. Hunter's voice filled the room slimy and arrogant. "Bianca is boring. She is a trophy. You have fire. I can set you up in an apartment. All you have to do is keep my secrets." I watched her face. I waited for the shock. I waited for the tears. I waited for her to rip the veil off her head, but instead she just laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound. She stepped down from the pedestal, the heavy silk train dragging behind her like a tail. She walked right up to me and snatched the phone from my hand. "You are pathetic, Zara." I blinked, confused. "Did you not hear him? He wants to cheat on you. He hit on me." Bianca shook her head, looking at me with pure disgust. "Hunter told me you would do this. He told me you were jealous. He said you invited him over, tried to seduce him, and when he turned you down, you threatened to use AI to fake a recording to ruin us." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You cannot be serious. You think I faked this?" Bianca listened to the tone, listened to the background noise. "That is my apartment. I don't care," she screamed, her face twisting into ugliness. "I don't care if it is real or not. You are just jealous because I am the one getting the fairy tale and you are the one with nothing. You have always been jealous of me. Dad loves me more. Mom loves me more. And now Hunter loves me. You can't stand it, so you want to destroy it. Well, I am not going to let you." She threw my phone onto the hard tile floor. The screen shattered. "Get out," she hissed. "You are not my sister. You are a cancer. And I am cutting you out." I bent down and picked up my broken phone. I looked at her one last time. She wasn't a victim. She was a volunteer. She knew deep down who Hunter was, but she preferred the lie because the lie came with a penthouse and a status update. I left the salon without saying another word. But the nightmare was just beginning. 2 hours later, I was back in my dark apartment trying to salvage the data from my phone when my laptop pinged with a notification. It was a live stream alert. "Bianca Brooks is live, the truth about my sister." I clicked on it. My stomach dropped. Bianca was sitting on her sofa, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Hunter was sitting next to her, looking solemn and protective, holding her hand. The viewer count was climbing rapidly. 500,000, 800,000, 1 million. "Guys," she sobbed into the camera. "I did not want to do this, but I have to protect my family. My sister Zara has been harassing us. She is having a mental breakdown. She lost her job, she is in debt, and she demanded we give her money. When we said no, she created fake recordings to try and blackmail us. She tried to ruin my wedding because she is miserable." Hunter leaned into the frame, speaking in a low, serious voice. "We are praying for her. We just want her to get help. But we cannot let her abuse us anymore. Please, if you see her, do not engage. She is dangerous." The comments section was a waterfall of hate. What a psycho. Jealous sister syndrome. Lock her up. She deserves to be on the street. They were turning the world against me. My own sister was using her influence to paint me as a villain to millions of strangers. My phone started ringing nonstop. Unknown numbers, death threats, people telling me to kill myself. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I walked to the window to get some air to look at the city and remind myself that reality still existed outside of the internet. That was when the glass exploded. A brick crashed through my living room window, spraying shards of glass everywhere. One shard sliced my cheek. I fell to the floor, covering my head as the wind howled into the room. I looked at the brick landing on my rug. Wrapped around it was a note. "Leave Bianca alone, or die, you leech." I sat there in the dark, surrounded by broken glass, blood trickling down my face. I could hear sirens in the distance. I had tried to play the hero. I had tried to use the truth to save my family. But the truth does not matter to people who live in a fantasy. To them, the truth is just an attack. I touched the cut on my cheek. I looked at the brick. And then I looked at the black ledger sitting on my desk, untouched by the chaos. I stopped crying. I stopped shaking. A cold clarity washed over me. I had been fighting with emotions. I had been fighting with sentiment. I had been trying to appeal to their hearts, but they didn't have hearts. They had bank accounts. Bianca didn't care about fidelity. She cared about the lifestyle Hunter provided. Otis didn't care about loyalty. He cared about the company's stock price. If I wanted to hurt them, I couldn't use shame. Shame was a social currency, and they controlled the narrative. I had to use the only currency they respected. I had to bankrupt them. I stood up and kicked the brick aside. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Bianca to beg for mercy. I walked over to the ledger. I opened it to the page about the trust charter. The page that proved Otis was a fraud. I was done being the sister. I was done being the daughter. I was going to be the executioner. They wanted a villain. Fine. I would be the villain, but I would be the kind of villain who owned the bank that held their mortgage. I picked up my shattered phone and extracted the SIM card. I put it into an old burner phone I kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I had memorized from my research. It was the private line of Marcus Thorne, the most aggressive corporate raider on Wall Street, a man my father hated more than anyone. "Hello," I said when he answered. "Who is this?" a gruff voice asked. "This is Zara Brooks," I said, staring at the broken window. "And I have 51% of a company I think you might be interested in buying. But first, I need a loan, a big one." The war for souls was over. The war for dollars had just begun. I made a tactical error. I assumed that beneath the layers of designer clothing and social media filters, my sister Bianca was still the little girl I used to protect from thunderstorms. I thought that if I showed her the truth, if I proved to her that the man she was about to marry was a predator who viewed her as a walking ATM, she would wake up. I thought I could save her. I did not realize that some people love their chains as long as they are made of gold. I arranged to meet Bianca at the bridal salon in Soho. She was doing her final fitting for the wedding dress, a $50,000 custom Vera Wang gown that my father had paid for with money embezzled from the company. When I walked in, she was standing on a pedestal surrounded by mirrors, looking like a princess. She saw me in the reflection and rolled her eyes, but she waved the seamstresses away. "Make it quick, Zara," she said, admiring her silhouette. "I have a tasting menu in 20 minutes. If you are here to ask for money again, the answer is no. Hunter told me you tried to shake him down at your apartment." I stopped cold. Hunter had gotten ahead of the story. He had planted the seed. But I had the water to make the truth grow. "I am not here for money, Bianca," I said, pulling out my phone. "I am here because I love you, and because you need to hear who you are actually marrying." I pressed play. The recording was loud and clear in the quiet salon. Hunter's voice filled the room, slimy and arrogant. "Bianca is boring. She is a trophy. You have fire. I can set you up in an apartment. All you have to do is keep my secrets. I watched her face. I waited for the shock. I waited for the tears. I waited for her to rip the veil off her head, but instead she just laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound. She stepped down from the pedestal, the heavy silk train dragging behind her like a tail. She walked right up to me and snatched the phone from my hand. "You are pathetic, Zara." I blinked, confused. "Did you not hear him? He wants to cheat on you. He hit on me." Bianca shook her head, looking at me with pure disgust. "Hunter told me you would do this. He told me you were jealous. He said you invited him over, tried to seduce him, and when he turned you down, you threatened to use AI to fake a recording to ruin us." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You cannot be serious. You think I faked this." Bianca, listen to the tone. Listen to the background noise. That is my apartment. "I don't care!" She screamed, her face twisting into ugliness. "I don't care if it is real or not. You are just jealous because I am the one getting the fairy tale, and you are the one with nothing. You have always been jealous of me. Dad loves me more, Mom loves me more, and now Hunter loves me. You can't stand it, so you want to destroy it. Well, I am not going to let you." She threw my phone onto the hard tile floor. The screen shattered. "Get out," she hissed. "You are not my sister. You are a cancer, and I am cutting you out." I bent down and picked up my broken phone. I looked at her one last time. She wasn't a victim. She was a volunteer. She knew deep down who Hunter was, but she preferred the lie because the lie came with a penthouse and a status update. I left the salon without saying another word. But the nightmare was just beginning. 2 hours later, I was back in my dark apartment trying to salvage the data from my phone when my laptop pinged with a notification. It was a live stream alert. "Bianca Brooks is live, the truth about my sister." I clicked on it. My stomach dropped. Bianca was sitting on her sofa, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Hunter was sitting next to her, looking solemn and protective, holding her hand. The viewer count was climbing rapidly. 500,000, 800,000, 1 million. "Guys," she sobbed into the camera. "I did not want to do this, but I have to protect my family. My sister Zara has been harassing us. She is having a mental breakdown. She lost her job, she is in debt, and she demanded we give her money. When we said no, she created fake recordings to try and blackmail us. She tried to ruin my wedding because she is miserable." Hunter leaned into the frame, speaking in a low, serious voice. "We are praying for her. We just want her to get help, but we cannot let her abuse us anymore. Please, if you see her, do not engage. She is dangerous." The comment section was a waterfall of hate. "What a psycho. Jealous sister syndrome. Lock her up. She deserves to be on the street." They were turning the world against me. My own sister was using her influence to paint me as a villain to millions of strangers. My phone started ringing non-stop. Unknown numbers, death threats, people telling me to kill myself. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I walked to the window to get some air, to look at the city, and remind myself that reality still existed outside of the internet. That was when the glass exploded. A brick crashed through my living room window, spraying shards of glass everywhere. One shard sliced my cheek. I fell to the floor, covering my head as the wind howled into the room. I looked at the brick landing on my rug. Wrapped around it was a note. "Leave Bianca alone or die, you leech." I sat there in the dark, surrounded by broken glass, blood trickling down my face. I could hear sirens in the distance. I had tried to play the hero. I had tried to use the truth to save my family. But the truth does not matter to people who live in a fantasy. To them, the truth is just an attack. I touched the cut on my cheek. I looked at the brick. And then I looked at the black ledger sitting on my desk, untouched by the chaos. I stopped crying. I stopped shaking. A cold clarity washed over me. I had been fighting with emotions. I had been fighting with sentiment. I had been trying to appeal to their hearts. But they didn't have hearts. They had bank accounts. Bianca didn't care about fidelity. She cared about the lifestyle Hunter provided. Otis didn't care about loyalty. He cared about the company's stock price. If I wanted to hurt them, I couldn't use shame. Shame was a social currency, and they controlled the narrative. I had to use the only currency they respected. I had to bankrupt them. I stood up and kicked the brick aside. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Bianca to beg for mercy. I walked over to the ledger. I opened it to the page about the trust charter. The page that proved Otis was a fraud. I was done being the sister. I was done being the daughter. I was going to be the executioner. They wanted a villain. Fine, I would be the villain. But I would be the kind of villain who owned the bank that held their mortgage. I picked up my shattered phone and extracted the SIM card. I put it into an old burner phone I kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I had memorized from my research. It was the private line of Marcus Thorne, the most aggressive corporate raider on Wall Street, a man my father hated more than anyone. "Hello," I said when he answered. "Who is this?" a gruff voice asked. "This is Zara Brooks," I said, staring at the broken window. "And I have 51% of a company I think you might be interested in buying. But first I need a loan, a big one." The war for souls was over. The war for dollars had just begun. The brick through my window did not break me. It woke me up. I realized that sitting in the dark, waiting for a loan shark or a miracle, was not a strategy. It was a victim mentality, and I was done being a victim. The next morning I called a liquidator. I did not negotiate. I did not hesitate. I sold my Cartier watch. I sold the diamond earrings my mother gave me for my graduation, the ones she always reminded me cost more than my first car. I emptied my closet of every designer handbag, every silk scarf, every pair of shoes that Bianca used to envy. By noon, I had $75,000 in cash in a duffel bag. It was a fraction of what those items were worth, but I did not care. Those items were shackles. They were reminders of a life where I had to smile and be grateful for scraps. Now I had war paint. I took the cash and hired the two most dangerous people I knew. The first was Leo, a forensic accountant I had dated briefly in college. He was brilliant, socially awkward, and hated corporate fraud more than he hated sunlight. The second was Ray, a private investigator who used to be a detective until he got fired for roughing up a corrupt senator's son. I brought them to the warehouse. We set up on folding tables next to my grandfather's old desk. I placed the black ledger in front of Leo. Then I placed the public tax filings of Brooks Enterprises in front of him. "Find the gap," I said. "Tell me where the money is really going." For 3 days, we lived on takeout coffee and energy bars. Ray was out on the street tracking Otis's movements, while Leo and I dissected the anatomy of my father's lies. It was worse than I thought. The ledger was not just a record of gambling debts. It was a map of systematic looting. Leo looked up from his laptop on the third night, his eyes bloodshot. "Zara, you need to see this. Your father is not just skimming off the top, he is gutting the fish." I walked over and looked at the screen. Leo had created a graph overlaying the company's reported revenue against its actual cash flow based on the ledger's vendor codes. "See these payments to Apex Logistics," Leo pointed out. "They are billed as supply chain consulting fees. $3 million a quarter. But look at the routing numbers. They loop through a shell company in Delaware and land right back in a private offshore trust controlled by Otis. He is stealing $12 million a year," I whispered. "It gets worse," Leo said, clicking to another tab. "The company's liquidity is non-existent. He has leveraged every asset. The buildings, the fleet, even the intellectual property. He has taken out loans against everything to cover these withdrawals. Brooks Enterprises is technically bankrupt. It is a zombie company. If the creditors call in the loans today, the stock goes to zero." I sank into the leather chair. My father was walking around acting like a tycoon, but he was standing on a trapdoor. Then Ray kicked the door open and walked in. He tossed a manila envelope onto the desk. It slid across the wood and hit the ledger. "You guys are looking at the past." Ray grunted, pouring himself a coffee. "You need to look at the future." I tailed Otis to a private airfield in Teterboro yesterday. He met with the CEO of Sterling Corp. Sterling Corp was our biggest competitor. They were aggressive, ruthless, and had been trying to buy us out for a decade. Why would he meet them there, I asked. Because he is selling, Ray said. He is arranging a fire sale. I got audio from a directional mic. The quality is bad, but you can hear the numbers. He is offering to sell the entire company, including the client list and the brand, for $200 million. That is half of what it is worth on paper. He is cashing out, I realized. He knows the ship is sinking because he drilled the holes. He wants to grab the cash and run before the audit happens. Ray nodded. And he is not running alone. I tracked the flight manifests. He has 2 one-way tickets booked for next Friday, one for Otis Brooks and one for Elena Rostova. Destination is the Maldives, non-extradition treaty. The room went silent. The picture was complete. Otis wasn't fighting for the warehouse because he cared about the legacy. He needed the warehouse deal to go through immediately because he needed the $50 million payout from the city to bridge the gap in the company's books, just long enough to close the sale with Sterling Corp. If he didn't get that cash injection from the warehouse, the auditors from Sterling Corp would see the holes in the balance sheet and the deal would collapse. He needs the building to cover his crimes, I said, my voice cold. Without it, he cannot sell, he cannot run, he goes to jail. Leo closed his laptop. So what do we do? Do we release the ledger? Do we block the sale? I looked at the crumbling walls of the warehouse. I looked at the notice of the tax lien still sitting on the desk. For days I had been thinking about how to keep this building, how to save my grandfather's legacy. But I realized now that the building wasn't the legacy. The truth was the legacy. And to get the truth out, I had to let Otis think he had won. If I fight him for the building, he will drag it out in court, I said, standing up. He will delay. And while we are fighting, he might find another way to cook the books or flee the country. I cannot let him leave. I need him here. I need him confident. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city skyline. I am not going to fight him, I said, turning back to them. I am going to give him exactly what he wants. Leo looked confused. You are going to sell him the warehouse? After everything? No, I said. I am going to give it to him. I am going to surrender. I will sign the deed over to him tomorrow. I will act defeated. I will act broken. I will let him think he has crushed me. But why? Ray asked. Because the moment he signs that deed, he assumes the liability for the toxic waste under this foundation. I explained, a smile forming on my lips. And more importantly, the moment he gets the deed, he will sign the contract with Sterling Corp. He will think he is safe. He will think he has the cash flow. And that I continued tapping the ledger is when we strike. We don't hit him when he is defensive. We hit him when he is celebrating. We let him sell the company. We let him deposit the check. And then we drop the paternity evidence. We drop the fraud evidence. We prove that he never had the legal right to sell the company in the first place because he is not a Brooks. The sale will be voided. The money will be frozen. And Otis will be stuck here with no company, no passport, and a $5 million environmental cleanup bill for a building he stole from me. I picked up the phone to call my lawyer. Pack up, boys, I said. We are going to a surrender negotiation. I need to look my best. I need to look like a loser. Because tomorrow my father is going to buy his own prison cell, and I am going to be the one handing him the keys. I spent an hour in front of the mirror practicing my defeat. I washed off my makeup until my face looked pale and hollow. I put on a pair of frayed jeans and an oversized gray sweater that made me look smaller than I was. I needed to look like a woman who had been broken by the world. I needed to look like the daughter Otis Brooks always wanted me to be, weak and dependent. I took a taxi to the headquarters of Brooks Enterprises. The glass building towered over the financial district, a monument to my grandfather's ambition that my father had turned into a fortress of greed. The receptionist, a woman who used to bring me hot chocolate when I was a child, barely looked up as I signed in. She printed me a visitor badge with the word temporary in bold red letters. It was a small indignity, but I tucked it into my pocket like a weapon. When I walked into the executive boardroom, they were all waiting for me. It was a scene straight out of a corporate execution. Otis sat at the head of the table, flanked by his army of lawyers. Bianca was there scrolling on her phone, looking bored. Hunter stood by the window, trying to look imposing. Otis didn't offer me a seat. He just gestured to the empty space at the other end of the table. So he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "The prodigal daughter returns. I assume you are here to stop wasting my time and sign the papers." I kept my eyes on the floor. I let my shoulders slump. I tried to channel every ounce of exhaustion I had felt over the last week into my posture. "I cannot do this anymore, Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I am tired. You win. I don't have the money to fight the lawsuit. I don't have the money to fix the building. I just want it to be over." Bianca let out a sharp laugh. "I told you, Daddy. She would fold in a week. She doesn't have the stomach for the real world." Otis silenced her with a wave of his hand. He looked at me, searching for any sign of deception, but all he saw was a broken girl in cheap clothes. "Smart choice, Zara," he said, pushing a thick stack of documents across the polished mahogany table. "Sign the deed transfer. Once it is filed, I will drop the lawsuit. You can go back to your little life and pretend none of this ever happened." I reached for the papers, but then I pulled my hand back. "I need money," I said, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. "I have debts, Dad. The lawyers, the rent. I cannot just walk away with nothing." Hunter scoffed. "You are in no position to bargain, Zara." I ignored him. "I need $100,000, I said to my father. Cash. Today. If you give me that, I sign everything. I disappear. You get the building, you get the subway deal, you get whatever millions you are planning to make. I just want enough to start over." Otis looked at his lawyer. The lawyer nodded slightly. It was a drop in the bucket compared to the $200 million sale he was trying to secure with Sterling Corp. "Fine," Otis grunted. 100,000. Consider it a severance package from the family. But you signed the non-disclosure agreement too. I don't want you crying to the press about how mean we were." I nodded slowly. "Just give me the pen." The room was silent as I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. I flipped to the signature page of the deed transfer. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was afraid they could hear it. This was the point of no return. I looked at the clauses. Transfer of title. Assumption of liability. That second clause was the key. In his haste to get the deal done, Otis hadn't ordered a new environmental inspection. He was relying on the report from 20 years ago. He didn't know about the underground storage tanks from the industrial dye factory that used to operate next door in the 40s. He didn't know that those tanks had leaked into the soil beneath my warehouse. He didn't know that I had hired a private geological surveyor 3 days ago who confirmed the soil was toxic. By signing this deed, I wasn't just giving him a building. I was giving him a hazardous waste site. The city wouldn't buy it for the subway terminal until it was cleaned up. And the cleanup cost was estimated at $5 million, plus the fines, plus the delays. I signed my name, Zara Brooks. The ink was black and permanent. I pushed the papers back to him. Otis smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just swallowed a canary. He signed his name next to mine with a flourish. "Done," he said, closing the folder. He signaled to his assistant, who handed me a cashier's check. $100,000. Hunter walked over and clapped Otis on the back. "Congratulations, Otis. You just secured the future of this company." Bianca looked at me with a smirk. "Don't spend it all in one place, Zara. Maybe buy some decent clothes for once." I took the check and folded it carefully into my pocket. I stood up, and for the first time since I entered the room, I straightened my back. I looked at my father, then at Hunter, then at Bianca. "Thank you," I said. "You have no idea how much this means to me." I wasn't lying. It meant everything. It meant I was free. It meant they were trapped. As I walked to the door, Otis called out one last time. "Zara, don't come to the wedding. We don't want any bad energy." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I turned back and gave him a genuine smile. "Don't worry, Dad," I said. I wouldn't miss the fireworks for the world, but I will watch from a distance. I walked out of the boardroom and into the hallway. As the heavy doors clicked shut behind me, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a lifetime. I pulled out my phone and texted Leo. "It is done," he signed. "The asset is his." Leo replied instantly. "Great. The liability transfer is immediate. I just updated the city registry. The Department of Environmental Protection has been notified of the new owner. They are sending the violation notice to his office tomorrow morning." I walked to the elevator, pressing the down button. I had $100,000 in my pocket and a ticking time bomb in my father's portfolio. He thought he had bought a gold mine. He had just bought a graveyard. But I wasn't done yet. The environmental disaster was just the appetizer. The main course was the sale to Sterling Corp. Otis would be celebrating tonight. He would be finalizing the merger documents, thinking he had the assets to back it up. He didn't know that I was already meeting with the CEO of Sterling Corp in an hour. Not as Zara the failure, but as Zara the whistleblower. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. As I descended to the lobby, I watched the numbers count down. 10, 9, 8. It felt like a countdown to an explosion. And I couldn't wait to see the mushroom cloud. 1 week. That is how long it took for the ink to dry on my surrender and for the poison to seep into my father's life. I spent those 7 days in a cheap motel room in Queens, eating diner food and watching the news ticker on a small television. I did not call anyone. I did not log into social media. I just waited. I knew the timeline better than they did. I knew that the moment the deed transfer was recorded in the county clerk's office, an automated notification would be sent to the Department of Environmental Protection. And I knew that my father, in his arrogance, would be too busy popping champagne to open his mail. On Monday morning, the storm finally made landfall. I was not in the office of Brooks Enterprises when it happened, but my private investigator, Ray, had tapped into the building's security feed. I sat on the edge of my motel bed watching the grainy black and white footage on my laptop like it was the Super Bowl. At 9:15, the elevator doors on the executive floor opened. But it wasn't the acquisition team from Sterling Corp who stepped out. It was 6 federal agents wearing windbreakers emblazoned with the letters EPA and a woman in a dark suit carrying a briefcase that looked heavy enough to crush a man's skull. They walked past the receptionist who tried to stop them. They marched straight into my father's glass-walled office. Otis was on the phone, likely bragging to a golf buddy about how he had swindled his daughter. He looked up, annoyed, waving a hand to dismiss them. But federal agents do not dismiss easily. The woman slammed a thick stack of papers onto his desk. I couldn't hear the audio, but I saw my father's face go from red to white in the span of 3 seconds. He stood up, shouting, pointing at the door. The woman didn't flinch. She pointed at the papers. She pointed at the deed he had signed with such glee just a week ago. Ray called me a minute later to fill in the blanks. "It is a notice of violation, Zara," he said, his voice crackling with excitement. "Class 1. They found the chemical leak from the old dye tanks. The city inspectors were out there at dawn. The soil toxicity levels are off the charts. They are designating it a hazardous waste site." "And the penalty?" I asked, taking a sip of stale coffee. "Immediate remediation ordered." Ray laughed. "They are fining him $50,000 a day for every day he delays cleanup. And the estimated cost for the excavation is $5 million. If he doesn't pay, they seize the company assets and open a criminal negligence case." I watched the screen as Otis slumped into his chair. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. He picked up his phone and dialed a number frantically. I knew who he was calling. He was calling his contacts at the city planning office. He was trying to push through the sale of the land for the subway terminal. But I knew the answer before he got it. The city doesn't buy toxic waste dumps. The eminent domain deal was dead. The $50 million payout he was banking on had just evaporated. He was stuck with the building. He was stuck with the debt. And worst of all, he was stuck with the liability right in the middle of a merger audit. Otis hung up the phone and threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall. He needed cash. He needed $5 million immediately to start the cleanup and keep the Sterling Corp deal alive. If the auditors saw this violation, they would run for the hills. I watched him pace the room. He ran his hands through his hair. Then he stopped. He looked at a framed photo on his desk. A photo of Bianca. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the office. I switched feeds. I didn't have cameras in my father's mansion, but I didn't need them. I knew exactly where he was going. He was going to the bank of Bianca. Later that evening, the scene played out exactly as I had predicted. My mother called me weeping into the phone, unaware that I was the architect of their misery. She told me everything. Otis had arrived at the Scarsdale estate in a panic. He found Bianca and Hunter by the pool drinking mimosas and planning their honeymoon. Bianca had just transferred the $4 million of her inheritance into a joint account with Hunter, preparing to pay for the wedding venue and the penthouse deposit. Otis didn't waste time with pleasantries. He demanded the money back. "I need the $4 million," he had screamed, knocking over a tray of drinks. "It is a loan, just for a month. I need to pay a contractor to dig up some dirt at the warehouse or the feds will shut us down." Bianca had looked at him confused and terrified. "But Dad, that is my money. You gave it to me. We have deposits to pay. We have the wedding." "There won't be a wedding if I go to prison," Otis roared. "Give me the checkbook, Bianca." Now Bianca, weak and conditioned to obey, had reached for her bag. She was trembling. She was about to hand over her future to save her father's past. But then a hand stopped her. It was Hunter. The man who had played the sycophant for years, who had laughed at Otis's bad jokes and lit his cigars, finally dropped the mask. He grabbed Bianca's wrist and pulled it back. "No, Hunter," said his voice cold and hard. Otis turned on him, his eyes bulging. "Excuse me, who do you think you are talking to? That is my money. I earned it. I gave it to her." "It is Bianca's money now," Hunter said, stepping between them. "And by extension, it is our money. We have plans, Otis. We are not draining our accounts just because you made a bad business deal." "You ungrateful little leech," Otis spat, stepping forward to strike him. "I paid off your gambling debts. I saved your knees. You owe me." Hunter didn't flinch. He shoved Otis back hard enough that my father stumbled and fell onto a pool lounge chair. "And I thank you for that," Hunter sneered. "But that was charity. This is business. You are sinking Otis. I can smell it. I am not going to let you drag Bianca down with you. We are keeping the cash. Figure out your own mess." Bianca stood there sobbing, looking from her father to her fiancé. "Dad, please don't fight." "Hunter, maybe we can give him half." "Shut up," Bianca, Hunter snapped at her. "We are keeping it. All of it." Otis lay on the chair, gasping for breath, looking at the two monsters he had created. The daughter he had spoiled was useless. The son-in-law he had bought was a shark. He realized in that moment that loyalty in the Brooks family was only as deep as the nearest dollar. He scrambled to his feet, adjusting his suit. "Fine," he hissed. "Keep it. I don't need you. I have my own accounts. I have the offshore funds. I will pay it myself, and when I sell the company, you two won't see a dime." He stormed into the house, heading for his study where he kept his secure laptop. He was going to tap into the secret accounts. The accounts labeled Project Canary, the money he had stolen from the company over 20 years. He opened the laptop. He logged into the Cayman Islands banking portal. He entered his password. He prepared to wire $5 million to a remediation firm to make the problem disappear, but the screen didn't show his balance. It showed a red box with a padlock icon. "Account frozen. Contact Compliance Department." Otis stared at the screen. He tried again. Frozen. He tried his personal checking account. Frozen. He tried the corporate expense account. Frozen. His phone rang. It was his personal banker, a man he had known for decades. "Otis," the banker's voice was shaking. "I don't know what is happening." We received a flagged report from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network this morning. An anonymous whistleblower submitted a dossier. What dossier? Otis screamed, sweat pouring down his face. They have everything, Otis. The ledger, the offshore routing numbers, the gambling payments. They have flagged every account associated with your social security number for suspected money laundering and embezzlement. The DOJ has issued a temporary restraining order on all assets pending a federal investigation. I cannot move a penny. You are locked out. Otis dropped the phone. The silence of the large house rushed in to fill the void. He had $4 million sitting by the pool that he couldn't touch. He had a $5 million fine he couldn't pay. And he had a federal investigation that was about to expose 20 years of theft. He sat there in the dark, the glow of the frozen screen illuminating his face. He had spent his life building a fortress of money to keep the world out, but he had forgotten to build a door, and now the walls were closing in, and he was locked inside with nothing but his lies. I closed my laptop in the motel room. I finished my coffee. It was cold, but it tasted sweet. The nightmare wasn't just financial anymore. It was existential. Otis Brooks was broke, and tomorrow I was going to make sure he was also homeless. The invitation said black tie, but I decided that the occasion called for something sharper. I chose a floor-length gown in crimson silk. It was the color of blood. It was the color of a warning flag. And in a room designed to be a sea of white lilies and pastel bridesmaids, it was the color of a target. The wedding of Bianca Brooks and Hunter Vander Woodson was being held at the Plaza Hotel, despite the fact that the bride's father was technically insolvent. Otis had managed to leverage the last bit of credit he had on a personal line to pay the vendors. He was desperate to maintain the illusion of power. He thought that if he threw a big enough party, the rumors of his financial ruin would disappear. He did not know that the rumors were the least of his problems. I walked into the ballroom just as the appetizers were being served. The security guard at the door hesitated when he saw my name was not on the list, but I simply handed him a folded $100 bill and walked past him before he could protest. The room was breathtaking. Thousands of white orchids hung from the ceiling. A 10-piece orchestra played soft jazz in the corner. It smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. I spotted my father near the ice sculpture. He looked terrible. His skin was gray and he was sweating despite the air conditioning. He was laughing too loudly at a joke made by a senator, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected the FBI to burst in at any moment. When he saw me, his smile vanished. He excused himself and marched toward me, grabbing my arm and pulling me into a quiet alcove near the kitchen entrance. "You have some nerve showing your face here," he hissed, his grip painful on my arm. "After what you did. After the environmental notice. You ruined me, Zara. Get out. Get out before I have security drag you out." I pulled my arm free and smoothed the red silk of my dress. "You don't want to do that, Dad. A scene would be very embarrassing. And besides, if you kick me out, who is going to save your company?" Otis froze. He looked at me with a mix of hatred and hunger. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the frozen accounts," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "I know you cannot make payroll next week. I know Sterling Corp walked away from the deal this morning when they heard about the toxic waste. You are drowning, Otis, but I have a life vest." He narrowed his eyes. You don't have anything. You are just a vindictive little girl." I took a step closer. "I have the one thing you need. I have a buyer, a private equity firm that specializes in distressed assets. They are willing to overlook the environmental liability. They are willing to pay cash, enough to keep you out of prison, enough to let you retire. But they only deal with me." It was a lie, of course. There was no buyer. There was only the end. But Otis was desperate. I saw the fight leave his eyes. He looked at the ballroom, at the guests drinking his champagne, at the facade he could no longer maintain. "We can talk tomorrow," he muttered, loosening his tie. "Go sit at table 19. In the back. And don't cause trouble." I smiled. "Enjoy the wedding, Dad. It is a night you will never forget. I walked into the main room and found my seat. The other guests at table 19 stared at my red dress. They whispered behind their hands. I didn't care. I poured myself a glass of champagne and waited. I watched Bianca and Hunter at the head table. They looked like the perfect couple. Bianca was glowing, basking in the attention. Hunter played the part of the doting groom, kissing her hand, laughing at her jokes. But I saw the way he checked his phone under the table. I saw the way his eyes lingered on the waitresses. The dinner service ended and the lights dimmed. The band leader took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "Before we open the dance floor, the groom has prepared a special video montage to celebrate the love story of Bianca and Hunter. Please turn your attention to the main screen." A massive projection screen descended from the ceiling behind the head table. The room went silent. Bianca clapped her hands in delight, looking at Hunter. Hunter looked confused. He whispered something to her, shaking his head. He hadn't prepared a video. I took a sip of champagne. I had. Or rather, my forensic accountant Leo had. He had spent the last 3 days cloning Hunter's phone and extracting the deleted data. It was amazing what people thought was gone just because they pressed delete. The screen flickered to life. Soft romantic music began to play. The guests sighed collectively. A picture of Bianca and Hunter on a beach appeared. Then a picture of them skiing. Then the music stopped abruptly. It was replaced by a jarring static noise. The screen went black for a second before a new image appeared. It wasn't a photo. It was a screenshot of a text message conversation. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. The contact name was My Soulmate, but the number didn't belong to Bianca. Message from Hunter. "I cannot wait for this to be over, baby. The wedding is a joke. Her old man is broke, but the girl has a trust fund he cannot touch. Once I get access to the joint account, I am transferring the cash to us." A gasp rippled through the room. Bianca stood up, her face pale. She looked at the screen, then at Hunter. "What is that? Is that your phone?" Hunter stood up, knocking over his chair. "Turn it off!" he screamed at the projection booth. "There is a technical glitch." "Turn it off." But the screen didn't turn off. It changed to the next image. A photo sent from Hunter's phone. It was a selfie of him in bed with a woman with dark hair who was definitely not Bianca. The caption read, "Thinking of you while I am stuck with the princess. 1 more week and I am free." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens before a bomb goes off. Every eye was glued to the screen. Even Otis was standing, his mouth open, staring at the evidence of his son-in-law's betrayal. Then came the final blow. A bank transfer receipt from Bianca Brooks Trust to Sarah Miller alimony and child support arrears. Amount $4 million. The text below it read, "Thanks for the payment, Hunter. Glad you finally found a cash cow dumb enough to marry you. See you next week." The room erupted. It was chaos. Bianca let out a scream that sounded like an animal in a trap. She turned to Hunter and began to hit him. She clawed at his face, her perfect manicure tearing into his skin. "You stole it! You stole my money! You gave it to her!" Hunter tried to push her away. "Bianca, listen, it is fake. It is AI. Someone hacked it." But nobody believed him. The evidence was too specific, too brutal. Otis charged toward the head table, his face purple with rage. He grabbed a champagne bottle from a passing waiter and swung it at Hunter. Security guards rushed in, tackling my father before he could commit murder in front of 300 witnesses. I sat at my table in the back, untouched by the mayhem. I watched as Bianca collapsed to the floor in her $50,000 dress, sobbing into her hands. I watched as Hunter was dragged out by security, shouting threats. I watched as my father was restrained, screaming about his money. A woman at my table, a distant cousin I hadn't seen in years, looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Did you know?" she whispered. I took one last sip of champagne and set the glass down. I stood up, the red silk of my dress catching the light. I looked at the wreckage of the perfect family. The lies were exposed. The money was gone. The reputation was destroyed. I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Otis saw me leaving. He stopped struggling against the guards. He looked at me, and in that moment he knew. He saw the lack of surprise on my face. He saw the red dress. He realized that I wasn't the savior. I was the architect. "Zara," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Zara, help us!" I stopped at the doors. I turned back one last time. "I told you, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "I wouldn't miss the fireworks." I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cool night air of Central Park. The sound of sirens was getting closer, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from the disaster. I was walking away from the job well done. I pulled out my phone and texted Leo. "Part 1 is complete. The wedding is over. Now let's take the company." The wedding reception had transformed into a crime scene of broken dreams and shattered glass. Hunter had fled through the kitchen exit the moment the security guards let him go, leaving Bianca wailing on the floor in a puddle of white toll and misery. My mother was on her knees beside her, trying to shield her daughter from the hundreds of cell phone cameras that were recording every second of the humiliating breakdown. But the real action wasn't on the floor. It was in the corners of the room where the money stood. This wasn't just a social event. It was a gathering of the stakeholders of Brooks Enterprises. The board of directors, the major investors, and the banking partners were all sipping warm champagne and watching the collapse of the family dynasty. I saw Charles Henderson, the head of the audit committee, cornering my father near the open bar. Henderson looked furious. I could hear snippets of his voice over the sobbing of my sister. He was asking about the frozen accounts. He was asking about the text messages on the screen. He was asking if the rumors about the environmental violation were true. Otis was sweating profusely. His perfectly tailored tuxedo was soaked. He was waving his hands, trying to spin the narrative, trying to tell them it was all a misunderstanding, a technical glitch, a malicious prank by a jealous daughter. But these men didn't get rich by believing fairy tales. They smelled fear, and Otis reeked of it. I decided it was time to put him out of his misery. I walked up the stairs to the bandstand. The musicians had long since stopped playing and were packing up their instruments, eager to escape the crossfire. I walked over to the lead singer's microphone stand. It gave a high-pitched squeal of feedback as I touched it. The sound cut through the room like a knife. The murmurs stopped. Bianca stopped crying for a second to look up. Otis froze mid-sentence, his eyes locking onto me. "Turn that off!" he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Someone cut the power. Get her off the stage." But nobody moved. The security guards were confused and the shareholders were curious. They wanted to hear what the woman in the red dress had to say. "I am sorry to interrupt the festivities," I said, my voice calm and amplified, filling every corner of the ballroom. "But since we are all here, and since the groom has seemingly resigned from his position, I think we should address the other resignation that needs to happen tonight." Otis charged toward the stage. "You are drunk, Zara. You are hysterical. I am having you arrested for trespassing." "I am not trespassing, Otis," I said, looking down at him. "And I am not drunk. I am the majority shareholder of Brooks Enterprises, and I am calling an emergency board meeting. Right now." Otis stopped dead in his tracks. He laughed, a desperate, breathless sound. "You are insane. You own nothing. You have a bankrupt warehouse and $100,000 I gave you out of pity. I own the company. I have the controlling interest." I shook my head slowly. "You used to. But you forgot to check the cap table, Dad. You have been selling off non-voting shares for years to fund your lifestyle. To fund the mistress. To fund Hunter's gambling. You thought those shares didn't matter because they didn't have voting rights." I paused, letting the information sink in. "But last week, when I took out a loan against the projected eminent domain value of the warehouse, before I signed it over to you, I didn't buy a yacht. I called Marcus Thorne. We formed a special purpose vehicle. And we spent the last 4 days buying up every single one of those fragmented shares from the dissatisfied minority investors you have been ignoring for decades. And then we converted them. Otis's face went gray. You cannot convert them. The bylaws don't allow it. They do if the chairman is under federal investigation for fraud, I corrected him. Clause 14, Section B. In the event of criminal negligence by the executive leadership, non-voting shares automatically convert to voting status to protect the equity of the company. The Department of Justice froze your assets this morning, Otis. That triggered the conversion. I pulled a folded document from my clutch and held it up. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I control 51% of the voting stock of Brooks Enterprises, and my first motion as the new controlling shareholder is the immediate termination of Otis Brooks as chairman and CEO for cause. The room erupted in gasps. Mr. Henderson, the audit committee head, didn't look shocked. He looked relieved. He nodded at me, acknowledging the hostile takeover as a necessary mercy killing for the business. You cannot do this, Otis screamed, his voice cracking. This is my company. My father built this. I am the only Brooks left to run it. You are just a girl. You are nothing. He was scrambling up the stairs now, his eyes wild. He wanted to grab the microphone. He wanted to hurt me. But 2 security guards stepped in front of me, blocking his path. They knew who signed the checks now. I looked at him, panting and pathetic, held back by the hired help. And I realized it was time for the final blow. The one that wouldn't just take his job but his name. Actually, Otis, I said, leaning closer to the mic so my whisper would sound like thunder. That is the other thing. You keep talking about your father, about Earl Brooks, about the legacy. I signaled to the projection booth. The image on the screen changed one last time. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a yellowed, handwritten document. The 1970 Trust Charter. Otis looked at the screen and stopped fighting. He knew what it was. Grandfather knew you were weak, Otis. He knew you had a darkness in you. That is why he wrote this charter. Look at paragraph 1. The position of chairman shall only be held by a direct biological descendant of Earl Brooks. I looked at the crowd. My father, Earl Brooks, was a great man, but he was sterile. He couldn't have children. He and my grandmother kept a secret for 60 years. They raised a son who was not his blood, hoping that nurture would overcome nature, hoping that love would make him a Brooks. I turned back to Otis. But it didn't work, did it? You aren't his son, Otis. You are the son of a tennis pro my grandmother had an affair with in 1959. Martha told me everything, and grandfather wrote it down in the ledger you were too scared to open. Otis fell to his knees. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the floor, stripped of his title, his fortune, and his identity in a single breath. You are not a Brooks by blood, I said, my voice trembling slightly with the weight of the truth. And now you are not a Brooks by business either. You are fired. I looked over at Mr. Henderson. Please have security escort the former employee off the premises, and call the legal department. We have a lot of work to do to clean up his mess. I placed the microphone back on the stand. It made a soft thud that sounded like a gavel banging. I didn't look at Bianca. I didn't look at my mother. I walked down the stairs and through the parted crowd of stunned millionaires. Otis was sobbing on the stage, a king without a kingdom, a father without a child. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The debt was paid, the ledger was balanced, and the warehouse in the South Side, the pile of trash he had despised, had turned out to be the foundation of a new empire. Mine. The ballroom was almost empty now. The waiters were clearing the half-eaten plates of lobster risotto, their eyes averted, trying to make themselves invisible. The orchestra had packed up and fled. The only people left in the wreckage of what was supposed to be the wedding of the century were my mother, my father, my sister, and me. Bianca was sitting on the edge of the stage, her $50,000 Vera Wang dress stained with wine and tears. She looked like a broken doll. The projection screen behind her was finally dark, but the images of Hunter's betrayal were still burned into everyone's retinas. She was holding her phone, dialing Hunter's number over and over again. Every time it went to voicemail, a fresh sob ripped through her chest. "He took it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He took it all. The transfer went through this morning. The joint account is empty. $4 million. Gone." My mother Elaine was kneeling beside her, stroking her hair. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Zara, please. Do something. You have to stop the transfer. You have the company now. You have the power. Call the bank. Call the police. Make them get her money back." I stood there looking down at them. For years this tableau had been my reality. Bianca the victim, Elaine the protector, and me the outsider. But the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the one looking in. I was the one holding the keys. "I cannot stop a voluntary transfer, Mom," I said, my voice echoing in the empty hall. Bianca signed the authorization. She put the money in a joint account. Legally, it was his money too. She gave it to him. Bianca looked up, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "But I didn't know. He tricked me, Zara. Please, you have money now. You just said you bought the majority shares. You are rich. You have to help me." "I have nothing. I cannot pay for the apartment. I cannot pay for my car. I don't even have money for a cab home." She reached out, trying to grab the hem of my red dress. Her hand was shaking. "Help me, Sissy. Please. We are sisters. Sissy." She hadn't called me that since we were children. Since before she realized that being Otis Brooks's favorite daughter meant treating me like dirt. I looked at her hand. I remembered all the times she had laughed when Otis made fun of my clothes. I remembered how she had smirked when I was cut out of the will. I remembered her live stream telling millions of people that I was a blackmailer and a psycho. I stepped back just out of her reach. My mother stood up, her face twisting into that familiar mask of disappointment. "How can you be so cold, Zara? She is your sister. She made a mistake. She was in love. You cannot just leave her destitute. You have to be the bigger person. You always are. That is your job." "My job?" I repeated, a dry laugh escaping my lips. My job was to be the scapegoat. My job was to be the invisible support beam that held this family up while you all rotted from the inside. But I quit that job tonight. Otis was sitting on a chair nearby, his head in his hands. He hadn't said a word since I fired him. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. Elaine grabbed my arm. "Zara, listen to me. We are family. You have won. You have the company. You have the power. Are you really going to let your sister starve just to prove a point? Is that who you are?" I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had watched me struggle for years and never once offered a hand. I reached into my clutch. "I am not going to let her starve," I said calmly. "I anticipated this might happen. Hunter is a predictable creature. So I brought a solution." I pulled out a plain white envelope and held it out to Bianca. Bianca's eyes lit up with hope. She scrambled to her feet, thinking it was a check, thinking it was cash. She snatched the envelope from my hand and ripped it open. She pulled out the single sheet of paper. Her face fell. She stared at the document, confused. "What is this?" "It is an employment application," I said. Bianca looked at me, her mouth agape. "A what?" "A job, Bianca. You need money. I have a vacancy. The janitorial staff at the old warehouse on Industrial Way is short-handed. The pay is $15 an hour. It comes with health insurance after 90 days. Bianca threw the paper on the floor. "You are joking. You want me to clean toilets in a warehouse? I am an influencer. I have a brand." "Your brand is dead," I said, my voice sharp. "You are the girl who married a con artist and lost her inheritance on a live stream. You are a laughingstock. Nobody is going to sponsor you. And as for your inheritance, it is currently in a crypto wallet in the Cayman Islands." I pointed to the paper on the floor. "Dad told me to go earn my own. He said it was a lesson in character. Well, now it is your turn. You want money. You work for it. You show up at 8 a.m. on Monday. You wear a uniform. You scrub the floors of the building you called trash. And maybe after a few years, you will understand the value of $1. You are a monster," Bianca screamed, stamping her foot like a toddler. I will never work for you. Then you will be homeless, I said simply. The offer stands for 24 hours. My mother looked at me with pure hatred. I don't know you anymore. You are not my daughter. I smiled. No, I am Earl Brooks's granddaughter, and I am cleaning house. Before she could respond, the heavy double doors of the ballroom burst open. But it wasn't a guest returning for a forgotten purse. It was 4 uniformed police officers and 2 detectives in cheap suits. They didn't look at Bianca. They didn't look at me. They walked straight toward the chair where Otis was sitting. Otis Brooks, the lead detective, said, his voice booming. Stand up! Otis looked up, dazed. What is this? Who called you? We have a warrant for your arrest, the detective said, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. Otis stood up, swaying slightly. Arrest? For what? I am a respected businessman. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and tax evasion. The detective recited, spinning Otis around and slamming him against the wall. My mother screamed, not a little gasp this time, but a full-throated shriek of terror. You cannot do this. He is innocent. It is a mistake. It is no mistake, ma'am, the detective said, snapping the cuffs onto Otis's wrists. We received a complete ledger of his illegal activities. Every transaction, every offshore account, every bribe. It is all documented. Otis twisted his head to look at me. His eyes were wide with panic. The ledger, he whispered. You gave them the ledger. I nodded. I told you, Dad, I didn't want the building. I wanted the truth. The officers hauled him up. He looked small in their grip. The arrogance was gone. The bluster was gone. He was just an old man who had stolen a life that didn't belong to him. Zara, he shouted as they dragged him toward the door. Zara, stop them. I am your father. You cannot let them take me to prison. I will die in there. I watched him go. I watched the man who had terrorized my childhood, who had made me feel small so he could feel big, being led away in chains. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel happy. I felt light. I looked at my mother and sister one last time. They were holding each other, weeping, their world completely destroyed. They had the money and they lost it. They had the status and they lost it. They had each other, and now that was all they had. I picked up the job application from the floor and placed it gently on the chair where Otis had been sitting. Monday at 8 a.m. Bianca, I said, don't be late. I turned around and walked out of the ballroom. I walked past the stunned hotel staff. I walked out into the cool night air. The flashing lights of the police cruisers painted the street in shades of red and blue. I watched them shove my father into the back of a car. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain and exhaust and freedom. I pulled my phone out of my clutch. I had one more call to make. Not to a lawyer, not to a banker, but to the contractor who was going to renovate the warehouse. We start digging tomorrow, I told him when he answered, and put a sign up on the front door. The Brooks Foundation, open to everyone. I hung up and started walking uptown. I had a company to run, and for the first time in my life, I was walking toward a future that was entirely my own. Six months have passed since the night the police took my father away in handcuffs. The seasons have changed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office. The winter snow has melted, replaced by the vibrant green of early summer. The office itself looks different too. I stripped away the heavy mahogany paneling and the pretentious oil paintings of hunting dogs that Otis loved so much. The space is now open, filled with natural light and modern art. It feels lighter. It feels like the truth. I sat in the executive chair, the leather still smelling new, and looked at the quarterly report on my desk. Brooks Enterprises was lean again. It was profitable. I had sold off the private jets. I had liquidated the vacation homes. I had fired the sycophants who had helped my father bleed the company dry. We were smaller, but for the first time in 20 years, we were clean. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was the front desk security. Ms. Brooks, the guard said. The cleaning crew is finishing up the lobby. There is a request from one of the staff members to see you. She says she is your sister. I paused, looking at the city skyline. Let her up, I said. But tell her she has 5 minutes. Her shift starts at 8. A few moments later, Bianca walked in. She wasn't wearing Vera Wang. She was wearing a gray jumpsuit with the company logo embroidered on the pocket. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face was bare of makeup. She looked tired. She looked older. But she also looked real. She stood by the door holding a mop bucket, unsure if she was allowed to step on the carpet. I just wanted to say thank you, she said quietly, her eyes fixed on her work boots. I raised an eyebrow. Thank you. For making you a janitor. For giving me a job, she corrected. Mom is staying with Aunt Linda in New Jersey. She spends all day crying. But I have my own place now. It is a studio apartment in the Bronx. It is small. It has cockroaches. But I pay the rent myself. With the money I earn here. She looked up at me then. I hated you for a long time, Zara. I thought you were cruel. But last week when I got my first paycheck, I felt something I never felt when Dad gave me his credit card. I felt like I existed. I nodded slowly. That is called dignity, Bianca. It is expensive, but it is worth it. She lingered for a moment, shifting her weight. Do you think Dad will ever get out? I looked at the file on the corner of my desk. The legal proceedings were moving fast. The evidence in the ledger was overwhelming. Otis was facing 15 to 20 years. I don't know, I said honestly. But if he does, he won't be coming back here. Bianca nodded. She turned to leave, grabbing her bucket. See you around, boss. She walked out, closing the door softly. I watched her go. We would never be close. The damage was too deep. But at least she was no longer a parasite. She was learning to survive. That was the only mercy I could offer her. My phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID displayed a number I recognized all too well. State Correctional Facility. It was Otis. He called every Wednesday at this time. He usually wanted money for a better lawyer, or to complain about the food, or to beg me to use my influence to get him a reduced sentence. He still thought he could manipulate me. He still thought he was the father and I was the disappointment. I looked at the phone ringing and ringing. I thought about answering. I thought about telling him that his company was thriving without him. I thought about telling him that the daughter he threw away was the only one who knew how to save his legacy. But then I realized I had nothing left to say to him. His voice belonged to the past, and I was living in the future. I pressed the block button. The ringing stopped. Silence returned to the room, peaceful and absolute. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the black ledger. It was the only thing I had kept from the old days. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed. I had read every entry, decoded every secret, but there was one page I hadn't read yet. The very last page. My grandfather had sealed it with a strip of wax. I had saved it for today, the day I officially took the company public again under its new name. I broke the seal and opened the book. The handwriting was shaky, written in the final days of his life. It wasn't a list of numbers. It was a letter. My dearest Zara. If you are reading this, it means you beat them. I knew you would. You have a fire in you that reminds me of the steel mills where I started. Your father chose the path of appearance. He wanted to look rich more than he wanted to be good. He built a house on sand. I gave you the warehouse because I knew you were the only one who could see the value in broken things. You see potential where others see trash. That is the heart of a true builder. But be careful, my child. The war you just fought can harden a person. It is easy to let revenge consume you. It is easy to become like them in your quest to destroy them. Remember this. The best revenge is not destroying their lives. They did that to themselves. The best revenge is building a life so beautiful, so authentic, and so full of purpose that their opinions no longer matter. Use the land. Build the center. Help the people Otis forgot. That is the only legacy worth leaving. Love, Grandpa. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was a tear of release. For months I had been running on anger. I had been fueled by the desire to punish them. But reading his words, I realized the anger was gone. It had burned itself out, leaving behind something stronger. I closed the book. I stood up and walked to the window. Below me, the city was moving. Cars looked like ants, people rushing to their jobs, their lives. Far to the south in the neighborhood where I had found the ledger, the construction cranes were already moving. I hadn't sold the whole property to the city. I kept the main building. The toxic soil was gone, cleaned up by the best environmental firm in the state. The walls were being reinforced. Next year, it wouldn't be a warehouse. It would be the Earl Brooks Community Center. It would have a coding academy for girls. It would have a financial literacy program for families. It would be a place where kids who felt like outsiders like I did could find their power. I wasn't just a CEO. I wasn't just a rich woman in a red dress. I was a builder. I picked up my purse and walked to the door. I turned off the lights in the office, plunging the room into the twilight of the evening. I didn't need to look back. There were no ghosts here anymore. Just four walls and a future waiting to be written. As I stepped into the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal doors. The woman staring back at me wasn't the girl who was pushed down the stairs. She wasn't the girl who was humiliated at the will reading. She was Zara Brooks, and she had earned her own. If you have ever had to fight for your place in the world, if you have ever been told you weren't enough, remember this story. Remember that your value is not defined by the people who cannot see it. It is defined by what you build when they are not looking. Thank you for listening to my journey. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe and share it with someone who needs to know that being the black sheep is not a curse. It is a superpower. This is Zara signing off. And remember, the best is yet to come.